Hello and happy Thanksgiving from everyone here at Rising. Brianna and I will be back to bring you the latest news next week. In the meantime, enjoy this flashback from earlier this year. (2024) Democratic hopeful Marianne Williamson joins us now for an exclusive in-depth interview. Marianne, welcome to Rising.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
It's our pleasure. Let's get right into it. Tell us about the campaigning you've been doing in early states and how you feel about the attention you're getting thus far.
It's very exciting. New Hampshire is going to continue to have its primary, regardless of the fact that the DNC has decided to pass it by. And people in the early primary states know the importance of their role. And Granite Staters are very much that. You know, there's a television network there called WMUR. And I did this thing called Conversation with the Candidate. And it was exciting, you know, and the clip from it has gotten over 2 million views on TikTok. And, you know, people are listening. People are hearing me, and it's exciting. It's exciting being on the ground in New Hampshire. And I'm in New York now doing press, and then I'm going to Los Angeles, and then I'm going to Atlanta to do a labor event, and then going to South Carolina, where I'll be all over the place. So, you know, it's full on making it happen.
You know, after being initially kind of blasé about what it would mean for Biden not to be on the ballot in the first two primary contests, there have been some news stories percolating over the last week or so that seem to suggest that both the establishment media and the establishment Democratic Party are increasingly concerned about what it would mean to have all of that media attention for a significant amount of time before South Carolina, during which the story would be that someone other than Joe Biden won those contests. I mean, Axios just put a piece out, I believe a few days ago, saying Biden could lose the first two 2024 contests to RFK Jr. But of course, polls actually show that you and RFK Jr. are very close in in New Hampshire, at least. What do you make of the Democratic Party's decision to basically cede that ground? And do you expect that any anxiety is growing here, where they might change their mind and and choose instead to reverse their decision to do what some people have described as rigging the primary so that Biden's first contest is in a state where he does very well?
Well, clearly they have a conundrum, don't they? The best laid plans oft go astray. They just wanted to take all the attention off New Hampshire, and New Hampshire said no. And yes, Bobby and I are neck and neck in New Hampshire now. So we're going forward with this. So clearly the Biden administration has a conundrum here. What they will decide to do, of course, is up to them. But they're noticing that. This can't be, you know, they're just trying to keep the lid on any conversation other than theirs. And they're doing it in various ways. And New Hampshire, as is very characteristic of New Hampshire, is refusing to go along.
There's been some reporting last few days, and I mean, honestly, there's a lot of reporting on this in general. You know, Joe Biden, President Biden's age. There was kind of spotlighting that behind closed doors, he's often angry with people, that staffers don't want to be by themselves around him. You know, what do you make of what we're learning about you know, how Joe Biden's treats the people around him, you know, whether age is actually indeed catching up with him? You know, you're not supposed to ask that, but we all see how he stumbles over his words and how he looks. And I think people imagine, is he, you know, would he be up for 6 more years of running the entire country?
Well, those are two separate issues, of course. As far as his age is concerned, if you want to know, if the president wants to prove that he's up to the task, for instance, of debating Donald Trump or Ron DeSantis, then he should debate Robert Kennedy and myself. There's a way for the American people to see, is he on his game mentally to handle something like that? And that is to debate us. That's number one. In terms of the fact that he used the F word in the office, and so did Clinton. And so for that matter, you know, there's a line from Jefferson talking about George Washington, how when the president is upset, I would rather not be in the room. I think that the issue of the president getting upset when someone hadn't done what he needed them to do is as silly as getting upset about anyone else, namely myself.
Well, I was going to ask you about that. If you think this is It seemed to me that there's some actual parity here after there was some coverage about you and complaints about your relationship with staffers, complaints about Amy Klobuchar. This seems to be one of the first stories involving a male politician being criticized for his tone with staffers. I mean, how do you look at that? Do you think that this is evidence that perhaps it's not as gendered as it maybe has been in the past? Or do you see that the attention that was paid to that particular story, do you think it wasn't sufficient, or somehow it was less than the level of scrutiny that you got when that piece came out about your staff relationships?
That wasn't scrutiny. That was smearing. When you are tried in a court of law, there are rules of due process. And the accused has rights as well. So if somebody's going to accuse you of something and you're in a court of law, they have raised their right hand and they've sworn to tell the truth, under oath, to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And your lawyer gets to cross-examine them and ask certain questions of them and show the judge and the jury certain evidence. But if you're tried in the media, particularly a media whose clear focus is to bring you down, or you're tried on the internet, or you're tried in the court of public opinion, you don't have those same opportunities to defend yourself. And that's what's going on here.
Well, Marianne Williamson, I want to switch gears for a little bit and ask you about recent news that was big on the left, AOC's choice to endorse Joe Biden on the Pod Save America podcast. She specifically said that given the primary choices available so far, that she would be endorsing Joe Biden. Many on the left were surprised by that, given how close your platform is to Bernie Sanders' 2020 platform and her endorsement of Bernie Sanders in that context. What do you make of the endorsement?
Her words were, given the field, I am endorsing the president. For me, given his policies, I am running against him. So let's be clear here. We are experiencing the hottest days in human history, the hottest days on record. This is a president who has given more oil drilling permits even than Trump did, who has approved the Willow Project, as well as the exportation of liquefied natural gas. He is claiming Bidenomics as this great economic success story, which it is for 20% of Americans. It's not going to do anything. All they're saying they're going to do in the future is finish the job. There's nothing here about bringing up the minimum wage for 1/3 of America's workers who live on less than $15 an hour. And in most American cities, living wage is $24, $25 an hour. These plans have absolutely nothing to do with dealing with the fact that 1 in 4 Americans live with medical debt. And all these lefties are endorsing him. So this is a story about the American left, and it's where it is right now. So what is she endorsing exactly? I think the fact that this early, they've got it all wrapped up. You've got, the business on the environment alone. You've got 4 major environmental organizations that have endorsed him. What are they endorsing? What are they endorsing?
Well, the argument that he makes and that people within the Democratic Party make in his defense is that the climate spending that he was able to pass is the largest in terms of volume, numerical amount in history. And what the left would argue is that it is far less than what it needs to be spent in order to actually have a meaningful impact on rising global temperatures, et cetera. So what do you do with that when there are so many people in, as you've pointed out, the environmental justice space, people who are members of ostensibly left-leaning environmental organizations who are spending so much of their time and energy defending and rallying behind Joe Biden when other environmental activists believe he needs to continue to be pushed? How do you push someone while you are endorsing and defending them?
Thank you. How does that work exactly? So this is the deal. Those who are touting, as you said, the very healthy investments in green energy that are part of the Inflation Reduction Act. That's true. The problem is that the Willow Project alone nullifies all of those. And the at this point, way beyond $858 billion defense budget, the U.S. defense industry is the single largest institutional emitter of greenhouse gases. So the playbook of the Biden administration is, it's almost like a purse thief, isn't it? Look over here so they won't notice what you're doing over there. The Democrats the corporatist Democrats have proven over the last few years that they're really good at saying the right thing. Oh, I'm the climate president, and I realize that the climate is an existential threat. Listen, we are beyond doing what you can in an incremental way. We are in the midst of the emergency now. You know, I'm reminded of an article I read that Barbara Ehrenreich wrote years ago. I think it was when Clinton is president, but I think it's true today. She said, what has happened to the American left? She said, what's happened to the American left is that everybody's been invited to the White House once. The whoredom I see from people who get the White House Christmas card or get their phone calls returned and are so easy to schmooze, so easy, you know, when somebody from the administration says, you know, we're with you. But like hell, you're with me. You will not stand up to big oil. So, you know, all I can do is point out the hypocrisy and hope that more voters figure it out.
Yeah, there's a number of issues where one might think the left, it's representative to the extent it has representation in Congress, would be doing something to challenge the administration. You know, we were talking yesterday, Brianna and I, about the reauthorization of FISA, which allows for warrantless surveillance of American citizens, something, you know, many on the left joined with libertarians on the right in opposing. Even Joe Biden himself, when he was a senator, you know, raised concerns about this. Now, you know, Matt Gaetz is leading a charge against this, and I really was hoping for, expecting members of the squad to be standing with him. And maybe that moment's still coming, but I can't find any reporting or press releases or anything suggesting that this, you know, this issue, the kinds of issues that people like Chelsea Manning and Edward Snowden and Glenn Greenwald, you know, people of the left raised, are now, you know, why is no one doing anything about them on the left anymore?
Darling, they're bought and sold. And I don't think they're bought and sold for money. It's not even about money. They're bought and sold for, we'll give you the appointment on the committee next time. You'll stay in favor with the establishment leadership. And then if you're in favor with the establishment leadership, maybe they'll give you a cookie. I mean, I don't know what else to say. I think at a certain point, we need to look at people's behavior. I'm not here to psychoanalyze them or even figure out their motivation. But at this point, what you say in terms of their actual behavior is true. And it's up to the rest of us to make our decisions based on their behavior.
Well,
and I think it's time to hold some people accountable.
Yeah, speaking of behavior, there's an interesting reality that's developing right now in Congress where a group of the, shall we say, Freedom Caucus Republicans are endeavoring to attach certain conditions to the annual defense bill, which are unlikely to be passed, but then consequently could tank the entire bill, right? So they're adding these requests to must-pass legislation that include cuts to spending in Ukraine, which has been a key core ask for aspects of the peace movement on both the right and the left. So there's this potentiality that they could undermine the entire defense budget, you know, effectively stopping additional defense spending because of an unwillingness to ratchet back any spending on Ukraine. They've also added in a bunch of other requests that are, I think, not progressive in the least or not populist in the least. But the effect of it might be that a bunch of Freedom Caucus people effectively cut military spending in a way that the left has been unwilling to do so far, especially in the last cycle with the minimal majority, some majority that the progressives had last time around. So I wonder what you make of that sort of effort, and if you want to opine further on what you would do with respect to military funding, generally speaking, and with respect to the Ukraine war.
Well, the larger issue about military funding to me is a separate issue. It's tangential to the issue of Ukraine specifically. In terms of military spending, we know the profound price gouging that is going on. Even 60 Minutes has reported on it, how the defense industry is price gouging the military. And I think American people on both the left and the right are ready to recognize that this canard, that somehow the more money you spend on defense, the greater your military, your national security. What a crock that is. Nobody in their right mind is now thinking that the Iraq War made us more secure or that the last 20 years in Afghanistan made us more secure. Some of the more conservative elements in this country have pointed out you could take 10% off the military budget and you'd still have plenty of money for the military to work effectively. And I think you could take 20% off that. We clearly have a war machine, what's called the blob in Washington, and clearly, and this has been true for 4 to 5 decades, much as Eisenhower warned us, our foreign policy is obscenely dominated by the military-industrial complex. So what the people on the far left and on the far right are now saying about that particular issue that you just discussed has to do with funding for Ukraine, because people on the far left and the far right agree on that. There's always been a kind of isolationist tendency in the United States. That, I think, is where the far right is coming from. I think people on the far left honestly believe, those who want to cut the funding specifically for Ukraine, feel that this is just a continuation of the same old war machine, basically imperialistic activity. I believe that the imperialism of Russia and Vladimir Putin that's the imperialism I'm concerned about on this particular one.
Why is that, Marianne Williamson? Some people would say, and do say, that the Russian invasion was wrong, illegal, and should not have happened. But also, the consideration of many Americans is what America's involvement in that particular conflict should be and why. And so we're in a place now where the discussion over the last week has been Joe Biden's choice to illegally send cluster bombs, a weapon that disproportionately kills children and is very indiscriminate in its targets, to Ukraine to continue to fight this war. Of course, Russia has also used cluster bombs, but the question is whether or not we should be facilitating the use of weaponry that is so dangerous to vulnerable people. So that seems like, to me, a good analogy for where a lot of leftists are coming to this war. Even if you think morally Ukraine is in the right position, which I think most people do, the question is whether or not, A, we should be involved, and two, whether our involvement is actually bringing the war to a close more quickly, whether our stated goals are actually achievable in terms of those who think that we need to regain Crimea or establish pre-February of last year borders, and what the cost to the public in Ukraine and also to Americans back home who are concerned about whether or not there's going to be sufficient domestic spending to take care of our population are going to be worth what we're doing, whether the costs are actually going to be worth the outcomes.
Well, in terms of the first thing you said about America's poking the bear. It's true. Both are true. Both are true that the United States does not have clean hands here, and the Russians have invaded a sovereign nation. Both are true. In terms of cluster bombs, it's horrifying. No, they should not be used. There are rules of war. There was a Geneva Convention. It's not an accident that over 100 countries have banned cluster bombs. The ones that haven't are Ukraine, Russia, and the United States. So they should not be used. They have horrifying repercussions even after a war. And as you said, they kill sometimes years after a war has ended, innocent civilians, including children. So even if you're going to say that you support for Ukraine at this point, I think it's absolutely wrong to use cluster bombs. In terms of the argument that we need that money here at home, the money that is being spent on Ukraine would not be spent on expanding Medicare, would not be used on domestic spending. I think where there is a good argument is about cutting defense spending in general. But the idea of focusing on the funding for Ukraine as opposed to defense spending, to me, has no logic to it whatsoever.
You know, former President Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis have both also come out against sending cluster munitions to arm Ukraine. You know, what do you make of this moment we're living in, where the Republican candidates, you know, the two leading Republican candidates, are sounding a note that is less interventionist than the Democratic president?
Well, I think when you're talking about DeSantis and Trump criticizing the use of cluster bombs, I welcome that. I'm glad they do. That's not specifically non-interventionist. That's specifically criticizing the use of munitions that should not be used. But hey, this is America. It's only been in the last few years, Robbie, that people have seemed to think if you're a conservative, you think this way. If you're a liberal, you think this way. If you're progressive, you think this way. If you're a Democrat, you think this way. If you're a Republican, you think this way. I think that this is kind of almost the way it should be, that we all recognize that people have their individual views. And hey, if the right wants to wake up to the fact that the American military has become this monstrous, uncontrollable facet of American politics, I don't have a problem with that. I think it's healthy. And then we can get on to the specific conversation about something like the Ukraine war.
On another subject, do you think that national law enforcement, intelligence agencies, the FBI, et cetera, need to be reined in as well? This has obviously become a top Republican concern. I think RFK Jr., your competitor, has also talked about, I think, seeing a lot of what they're saying about the concerns that for censorship on social media, for going after Trump supporters, that kind of thing. Do you think it's valid for the American people, or some of them, right-leaning ones at least, to have lost faith in national intelligence, the apparatus of the state? And what do you think is the solution if you do think that's a problem?
First of all, absolutely yes. And it's not just people on the right who are upset about this. It's people on the left as well. You yourself mentioned FISA a few minutes ago. I think people on the left are upset as well. As soon as they passed the Patriot Act, people started yelling. And at that point, it was mainly people on the left. But yes, I'm old enough to, there was scuttlebutt about the CIA, starting with the Kennedy assassination. So, yes, of course, these agencies, we know about too many covert operations. We know about lack of accountability. And people on both left and the right are asking, who's in charge here? And who are they going after? And why are they going after? And when you mention the people, whether you're talking about Assange, whether you're talking about Glenn Greenwald, whether you're talking about the subject of Snowden, and whether you're talking about Chelsea Manning, and remember, Daniel Hale is still in jail. So clearly, there's an official protection of some covert and secret type of organizations and agencies. And the fact that people are asking questions and upset about this on both left and right, I think is healthy for our democracy.
Marianne, I want to ask you a little bit about this electability question. Oftentimes, even though it's a primary, voters are concerned and looking toward the general election and are making decisions based on their perception that the candidate they pick can ultimately win down the line. This was an issue that plagued Bernie Sanders back in 2020. Voters would say, well, I like Bernie, I might even prefer Bernie, but can he beat Donald Trump? I'm not sure. I want to ask what your response is to voters who might feel very positively about your campaign, but have questions about what a general election contest would look like, especially as it seems increasingly plausible that Trump is going to be the nominee.
Well, let's remember, in poll after poll after poll, it was demonstrated that Bernie is the one who would have beaten Trump. So the DNC didn't care. But if you were just thinking about who could actually have a better chance to beat Trump, demonstrably, there was an argument that Bernie would have had an easier chance beating Trump. I don't buy the idea that because Biden beat Trump in 2020, for which I and millions of us are extremely grateful, don't get me wrong. But it is not, to me, a logical conclusion that because he beat him in 2020, he would necessarily beat him in 2024. And also this idea that none of us should challenge him and everybody should just fall in line right now because that will make the Democrats more unified, which is what we need to be to beat Trump in 2024. I don't buy that either. In 2016, how many Republicans were running? And yet, 2020. And yet, wait a minute. Yeah, in 16.
You had it right the first time, 2016,
so many
yes.
people were running, and so many people running in 2020,
Sure.
And still the Republican won. So I think it's healthy for democracy. If you want to know who would beat Trump, this is why we should have debates. People should see Bobby, people should see me, and people should see Biden. We have very different agendas, and we come across in ways that are very different. Let there be debates. Let the American people see, meaning specifically here, Democratic voters or likely Democratic voters, and let the people decide. I think it's the people who will be voting in this election for the Democrats who should decide who they think is the best person. This shouldn't be something made by secret by a bunch of men smoking cigars like it was 100 years ago or something, but it's also not something that should be made without the input of the Democratic voters. That's the point of a primary. You can't be a spoiler if you're running in the primary. You can't be a Jill Stein if you're, and I don't want to say that like negatively about her as a person, but in terms of the what she symbolizes, you can't be that if you're running as a Democrat in the primary.
I mean, I agree with you about the polls, obviously, that demonstrated, or that suggested at least, that Bernie Sanders was going to be a stronger matchup against Donald Trump in 2016 than Hillary Clinton was. But the voters obviously felt differently. The media, I think, played a big role in seeding doubt that because he was a socialist, people weren't going to vote for him. There was talk about what, Cubans in Miami and such, were they going to go along with it, all of these kinds of things. So what I'm asking you specifically is to make the case for why you think substantively in a debate context with someone like Donald Trump head to head would be more able to effectively make your case for why you should be president than if Joe Biden were the person in that position.
The majority of Americans, both liberal and Democrat, say they want universal health care. The majority of Americans, according to the polls now, both Democrat and Republican, say that they want tuition-free college and tech school. The majority of Americans, Republican and Democrat, including gun owners, say that they want more common sense gun safety laws. Now, on that one, the president, I think, would do what he could. The things that I am standing for, the economic U-turn, the economic new beginning, whether it has to do with universal health care, tuition-free college, paid family leave, a guaranteed living wage, millions of more Americans want that. This Bidenomics, everything's doing well that is the president's message this time, applies to 20% of the American people. And that 20% are living on an island economically, surrounded by a vast sea of economic despair. I feel that the Biden administration's argument at this time is such a redo in an almost potentially tragic way electorally, a kind of slow motion car crash that was the year 2016. He's basically saying what Hillary said in 2016, which was, let's continue with the success of the last 8 years. And millions of people said, what success? I'm drowning here. So the president is saying, we've got a healthy economy and we're doing good. That is contrary to the visceral experience of millions and millions of Americans. So this idea that they have a good winning argument, I would ask anyone to just look at that logically. That is not a good winning argument. And it doesn't even come along with a promise to do anything differently. There's no promise there, even about a public option. There's no promise there about even revisiting the raised minimum wage. We have 1/3 of American workers live on less than $15 an hour. Can't even find a place to live. Can't find an apartment in major cities in this country. And you've got people like AOC endorsing this and thinking this is going to help us because we're going to be unified in 2020. I think that's illogical, just completely illogical. I mean, in 2024.
I think in order to get a lot of that agenda that you just described passed and made into law, it would take pretty significant structural changes, just given the realities of the Senate, the filibuster, et cetera. What are your feelings on expanding the Supreme Court, getting rid of the Electoral College, DC statehood, all the kind of, I think, structural things that progressives talk about being necessary to enact the agenda. What are your feelings on that?
Well, not all of those things are necessary to enact the agenda I just said. Enough progressives who have those, who wish to vote for those things is what is necessary. Any president hopes that the House and the Senate is, of their party and of the ilk of people who agree with them. The left has to decide whether or not it's going to go for power at this point. This namby-pamby going along with the milquetoast stuff, this is not going to make it happen. Now, when you talk about the Supreme Court has gone rogue. This is, I don't know any other way to say it. It is dominated by some corporate hacks. And yes, absolutely, if what needs to be considered is expanding the court, as president, I would wish to see this. And if I'm president and you've got a Senate, where it's going to give you a problem in terms of something like raising the minimum wage or Medicare for all, then absolutely get rid of the filibuster. We are allowing these sclerotic traditions that were come up with by dead people, sometimes racist dead people. That's why they came up with these things. And we are allowing them to hold us back. When the president said during his campaign that he would raise the minimum wage, and he did for federal workers. But when it came to putting it in the COVID relief bill, the parliamentarian said that it was not okay. Can you imagine the Republicans allowing the parliamentarian to stop them? Can we get some spine here? No, that was convenient for a president who also knew that he had to make sure that the Chamber of Commerce wasn't too upset by him. The left has to decide: are we going to have spine here? Are we going to really go for power? Or are we going to continue this chess game that is getting us nothing?
I think you're completely right. George Bush II absolutely did fire his parliamentarian when it looked like they were going to stand in the way of his desire to drill in the Arctic.
Exactly. The Republicans don't.
And what you're seeing right
go for.
now with the Freedom Caucus in the House, is making many people recall the force to vote moment. They have and are choosing to largely shut down the Republican agenda until their particular demands are met. And it has not escaped the notice of many people on the left that the squad members had the exact same ability to do so in the early years of the Biden administration and chose instead to try to work within the party to get results. But I want to ask you about that, Marianne, because this question of is it possible to be genuinely adversarial within the Democratic Party or not has been raised, especially as Cornel West has entered the race. And to some folks, the two Bernie campaigns and the way that the DNC chose to treat him in the context of those campaigns was evidence enough that the Democratic Party was never going to allow there to be anything approximating fairness for left candidates. They see the choice to not have a primary. They see the choice to reorder the primary schedule. They see the choice to shut down debates. And they say this is evidence of how much obstruction you're going to get within the Democratic Party. It's better to take this moment and the public energy around the ideas that you so eloquently laid out, and you funnel people into alternative non-corporate parties that are less able to be corrupted in the way that the Democratic and Republican parties have been corrupted, precisely because there are limitations on corporate funding, et cetera. What do you say to people who make that argument and who are looking to Cornel West as the left candidate, because not of you per se, but because of their skepticism that the Democratic Party is ever going to give you a fair hearing?
That's their right. Third-party voices were very important in American history. Abolition came from the Abolitionist Party. Women's suffrage came from the Women's Party. Social Security came from the Socialist Party. Everybody has to follow their own conscience on where they can be most helpful. I personally have maybe it's a nostalgic, romantic ideal about the Democratic Party because I'm old enough to remember a time when no matter what, you could depend on the Democratic Party more than not. They were the unequivocal supporters of the working people of the United States. I think of myself as a Roosevelt Democrat. So I remember watching what happened to the Democratic Party under Bill Clinton. I remember when the Democratic Leadership Council was formed. I remember when this fissure occurred. And I've seen what's happened since, as we all have. So they say, the corporatist establishment elite of the Democratic Party, that the progressives are trying to hijack the party. No. They hijacked the party. We're Franklin and Eleanor. They would have a hard time even allowing Franklin Roosevelt in today. So Franklin Roosevelt would be deciding whether or not to run third party. And at a certain point, he actually said to Wendell Willkie, Franklin Roosevelt himself, because of a lot of the pushback he was getting from some of the Southern senators, actually approached Wendell Willkie about forming a third party. And Wendell Willkie then actually died before they got too far in the conversation, but he had expressed some interest. So I understand it. For myself, I think these times the stakes are too high. So I'm standing within the Democratic Party, but I don't have criticism for. I think we all need to judge each other less and appreciate and listen to each other more. So if people, I hope that a lot of those people, even who plan to, if they're thinking they're going to vote for Cornel in the general, will vote for me in the primary, because except on the issue of Ukraine, I think he and I are very aligned on things. Where
are you different on the issue of Ukraine?
Well, he is very critical of any U.S. support. From what I've read, I mean, I'm not trying to speak for him, but from what I've read, it seems to me a different conversation.
Are you concerned that because so much of the so many political independents at this time are motivated by that particular issue and Ukraine funding, that you're being potentially closer to Biden than Cornel West or RFK Jr. on that issue makes it difficult for you to make the case to an independent-minded person why they should go with you? And then the people who might agree with you on that issue might say, well, I'm going to choose Joe Biden and not switch horses midstream. Is there a lane for you being a Bernie progressive except for this particular issue just because of how galvanizing it is to so many independent politicos right now?
Well, the first thing I would point out is, to me, it is very progressive to be anti-imperialist. And that means for me, Vladimir Putin's imperialism. So I don't think it's a non-progressive view. Do I realize that that's kind of where the progressive left has gone and that that's probably not good for me politically? Yeah. But what am I supposed to do? I'm not here to change my views so somebody likes me. At this point, and I'm here to speak the truth of my heart and my analysis as best as I can understand events. That's what I'm doing as a candidate, and that's what I would do as president. So yeah, I mean, I get it, like, oh, something else for people. But a lot of those people are the same people who say, well, I don't like her because she's woo-woo. I mean, for the honest critic, they will hear my position and then decide for themselves by election day whether or not that is a deal breaker for them. I'm not feeling, you know what I mean?
Sure.
And everything from my historic record, as it were, of criticism of the military-industrial complex, my stand for a U.S. Department of Peace, my stands about Iraq, my stands about Afghanistan. So. I can't control how other people hear me. I can't control what other people decide. And hey, that's democracy. The one thing I can control is whether people are given the option of a fundamental alternative to the neoliberal politics that dominates our political system today, including the corporatist establishment, democratic elite. And where people go with that, in relation even to my sense of what is going on with Ukraine, is up to the voter. All I can do is be honest.
Marianne, I want to ask you about COVID. It's an issue that I think really animates, in particular, the people who watch this show. So I want to make sure you have an opportunity to address those policies. We have done a lot of reporting on both, policies during the pandemic of lockdowns and mandates, et cetera. We asked RFK Jr. a lot about that when he was on the show. So, I want to make sure you have the same opportunity to address some of those things, particularly both on, what is your view of Joe Biden's COVID vaccine mandate policy? He tried to require millions of workers to have to get the COVID vaccine to continue working, and then that policy was struck by the Supreme Court. That, and what is your current understanding of the reality or the possibility that that U.S. funding had something to do with the lab leak which caused COVID in the first place?
I think the question of whether U.S. Funding was involved in the Wuhan lab is a very important question. Healthy skepticism to me is part of good citizenship. So I don't have a problem with the American people asking questions. I have a problem with the U.S. government not answering them. So, yeah, there are a lot of questions about all that, and I think it's healthy that people are asking. If you talk about the sort of dark side of this kind of conspiratorial sensibility that has taken root among so many Americans, if there was greater transparency to begin with, if people had more of a sense that they could trust their government to begin with, then I don't think that there would be the creation of this blowback in the form of some very dysfunctional conspiratorial thinking. So yes, we should do everything possible to find out absolutely what happened in that lab, and obviously what the Chinese had to do with it clearly just becomes obvious. But the question of did any funding, we know about Obama shutting down at one point, the sort of famous story that we've all been told that Obama had asked about a certain study, said, could the virus escape? He was told yes. He said, shut it down, which is very good. There continues to be a question, did anybody go rogue and go against the president's wishes? We don't know. I have no problem, however, with there being investigative journalism around this. In terms of the mandates, I think it's important to remember that a lot of the things that the president said were get a test or have a Q-tip up your nose. I didn't have a problem. I do have a problem being told I have to take a shot, but I don't necessarily have a problem with someone saying to me, put a Q-tip up your nose if, in fact, someone feels that there's a public health concern.
Yeah, that's an interesting distinction. I do think that testing was underemphasized by both the Biden administration and those looking for alternative, less invasive ways to stop the spread than vaccine mandates. As we wrap up here, I just want to ask you, Marianne, it occurs to me that so many people know you and came to be familiar with you through your work in a very different space, outside of the political space, as a spiritual advisor, as someone who has shown a lot of insight in terms of the nature of our community and our interpersonal interactions and our spiritual life. And there has been a lot of interest in the case of Andrew Tate and some of these figures in the manosphere, so-called manosphere, Jordan Peterson and the like, who have been offering a prescription to young men in particular as to how to feel more centered, whole, and happy in a world that is, by many metrics, less hospitable to young men in particular. Tucker Carlson just earlier this week did a lengthy interview with Andrew Tate where they talked about any number of things. Andrew Tate obviously is a controversial figure who is being charged currently with alleged sex trafficking. And these are the kind of people that are attracting an audience in part because they are offering some kind of answer to a spiritual void that young men in particular are facing. And I wonder what prescription you would offer and what you make of the appeal of some of these figures in the manosphere.
Well, I never heard Andrew Tate speak to a spiritual void. I never heard Andrew Tate speak to a spiritual void. And I don't believe that supporting men in finding their genuine masculine should ever be at the expense of women. So I never saw Andrew Tate's prescriptions to men, either spiritual or of value to women whatsoever. In terms of Jordan Peterson, when he began, all the kind of be accountable, grow up, get a spine, make your bed, I thought was kind of cool. But he has moved in a direction that's just, there's nothing spiritual about the type of stuff that he's talking about now, including his attacks on me, Jordan. So, I...
What has Jordan Peterson said to you? I might have missed that.
Oh yeah, go check it out. He's not my biggest fan, apparently. He's
that's
Bobby right now.
That's sad. Before we let you go, what do you... I wanted to ask you about the same kind of general question trajectory. But young women, there's a lot of conversation about social media and is it harmful to teenage girls or I guess to people in general. Obviously, it's not going away anytime soon. We're all on our phones a lot. I have been wary of this being framed as like so bad. I think there are elements of moral panic to the way people describe how social media has changed our society. I think there's positive and negative. But do you have concerns about young people and how on their phone they are and how that has to do with their self-actualization?
Yeah, not just young people, all of us. I mean, the addictive qualities of these things, who among us? I myself am saying sometimes, why do you have your phone in your hand? Why do you need your phone in your hand? I think we all have issues to look at there, and people understand the addictive quality, the way the algorithms are worked, et cetera. In terms of children, yes, absolutely. There's a problem here. The public school system of Seattle, Washington is now suing the tech companies because of a causation that has been established, not a correlation, but a causation between the number of hours that young people whose prefrontal cortexes are not even fully developed yet, the numbers of hours that they spend, and their focus issues, their sleep issues, their learning issues. There's a serious problem here. And I think it's a good thing that Americans are asking these serious questions. You don't get deep answers until you ask deep questions. Now, as you said, Robbie, there's very positive aspects of social media, very positive aspects of the internet. No one is denying that. And it's not going away. But I think that, just like other generations came to understand, smoking all the time is not so good for you. I think we're coming to understand not only in terms of the use of these things, in terms of the algorithms and the addictive qualities, but some of the other issues about having those things close to our brains or whatever. People we're in the middle. There's so much going on in our society right now, which feels chaotic, but which is actually ultimately good, I think. Questions coming up, things that we're looking at. But I think more than anything, even though I do believe there should be regulation of tech companies in many cases, et cetera, I think a lot of this is going to have to do with personal change. That when you talked about my career, Martin Luther King said, we need quantitative changes in our circumstances and qualitative shifts in our souls. We need governmental changes. We need policy changes to align with the better angels of our nature. We need policy changes to bring us back into alignment with the democratic and the humanitarian principles of our own Declaration of Independence, as opposed to short-term profit maximization for major U.S. and multinational corporate interests. There's no doubt about that. But I think also people realize that a lot of the changes have to occur inside our own hearts. How we behave, our lifestyle decisions, how we treat each other. It's a big both and, not an either or. That's how massive this phase transition is, not just in our country, but on the planet today.
Marianne Williamson, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here. Thank you.